This is an optional video that I wanted to include just to talk about the difference of the ray trace workflow versus the rasterization workflow. The restoration workflow is like the older effect stack workflow we had to use in Lumion. I just want to point it out because the effects you see in photo mode actually belong to that mode. So, earlier when we're setting up our ray trace mode, notice how we only had a couple effects, right? If I were to do the rasterization workflow, I'd actually have like a dozen different effects. And let me show you what I mean. If I go here to add effect, these guys right here, reflection, hyperlight, skylight, they all belonged to the rasterization workflow, not the ray trace workflow. So if I were to add this, see how it's being blocked? That's because I have ray tracing enabled. So I'm just going to turn it off just so you can see what's going on. Turn that off. Okay. And this is it without any rendering effects, right? So if I were to go back here and start building it up, right? I would need to add hyperlight, and hyperlight helps control, the skylight here. Let me enable this so you can see what's going on. It's really, really subtle, but it adds some global illumination throughout the scene. Then you have reflection, and this, you literally have to tell it like which surfaces should be reflective, which is a little annoying, right? Because you have to tell it that things should be shiny, right? So speed ray is their way of a quick calculation for reflections. Reflection planes, if I hit active planes and then start clicking surfaces, I have to tell it, oh, this glass should be super shiny. Like, give me super realistic reflections here. Same thing with the counter. And it's just like, this was the old way of doing it, super slow. You had to select all these different planes, and sometimes you run out of planes, right? So it wasn't that great as a workflow. But the cool thing was you kind of had control over how long your renderings would take, because now you're saying, oh, use less effects to render faster, as opposed to now where it's kind of all based on your samples and your bounces, which, pros and cons for both. So then the next thing was skylight. So this was controlling the quality of the light coming from the real sky and putting it here. So like, you see how I'm like brightening things up. Let me click that. Okay, and I have to include this, and then I'd have to boost this. You can see there's like all these different settings, but like the realism still isn't there. It still feels kind of cartoony. That's why the ray trace engine is such a game changer. So my point is, this was the old way. If your GPU doesn't support ray tracing, then this is unfortunately the way you have to render. But if it does support ray tracing, use that. This method is outdated. I think at some point they'll probably remove it from the render engine. But anyways, that was my quick note for you guys.